Hello, guys and gals, and this is part 2 of The Last Unicorn by Peter Beagle. Beagle. I'm sorry, I keep saying Bagel. It's Beagle. Anyways, in the last episode, the unicorn decided to set off for the forest and met a butterfly that mainly said poems and sang to her. Which was, I'm not sure if that was actually in the movie or not. That's kind of sad if they cut it out, especially since the butterfly is basically based off of the author. I mean, that's like basically cutting out like the soul. Anyways, we were on page 18, and we are going to continue from there. Okay, let me just check and make sure. Any more songs? Okay. And we are going to continue here. Which was the best way she could think of saying goodbye to a butterfly, but instead of leaving her, he fluttered above her head, looking suddenly less dashing and a little nervous in the blue evening air. "Fly away," she urged him. "It's too cold for you to be out." But the butterfly still dallied, humming to himself. They ride the house you call the Macedoni, he intoned absent-mindedly, and then very clearly, "Unicorn, Old French unicorn, unicorn, Latin unicornus, literally one-horned, unus, one, and cornus, a horn, a fabulous animal resembling a horse with one horn. I'm a crook and a captain, bold, and the mate of a Nancy brig. Has anybody here seen Kelly?" He strutted joyously in the air, and the first fireflies blinked around him in wonder and grave doubt. The unicorn was so startled and so happy to hear her name spoken at last that she overlooked the remark about the horse. "Oh, you do know me," she cried, and the breath of her delight blew the butterfly 20 feet away. When he came scrambling back to her, she pleaded, "Butterfly, if you really know who I am, tell me if you have ever seen anyone like me. Tell me which way I must go to find them. Where have they gone? Butterfly, butterfly, where shall I hide?" he sang in the fading light. "The sweet and the bitter fool will presently appear. Christ, that my love were in your arms, and I in my bed again." He rested on the unicorn's horn once more, and she could feel him trembling. "Please," she said, "all I want to know is that there are other unicorns somewhere in the world. Butterfly, tell me that there are still others like me, and I will believe you and go home to my forest. I have been away so long, and I said that I would come back soon." Over the mountains of the moon, the butterfly began. "Down the valley of the shadow, ride, boldly ride." Then he stopped suddenly and said in a strange voice, No, listen, don't listen to me, listen. "You can find your people if you are brave. They passed down all the roads long ago, and the Red Bull ran close behind them and covered their footprints. Let nothing you dismay, but don't be half safe." His wings brushed against the unicorn's skin. "The Red Bull?" she asked. "What is the Red Bull?" Well, besides it being an energy drink now. The butterfly started to sing, "Follow me down, follow me down, follow me down, follow me down." But then he shook his head wildly and recited, "His firstling bull has majesty, and his horns are the horns of a wild ox. With them he shall push the peoples, all of them, to the ends of the earth. Listen, listen, listen quickly." "I am listening," the unicorn cried. "Where are my people? And what is the Red Bull?" But the butterfly swooped close to her ear, laughing. "I have nightmares about crawling around on the ground," he sang. "The little dogs, Trey, Blanche, Sue, they bark at me, and little snakes, they hiss at me. The beggars are coming to town. Then at last come the clams?" For a moment more he danced in the dusk before her. Then he shivered away into the violet shadow by the roadside, chanting defiantly, "It's you or me, moth, hand to hand, to hand to hand to hand." The last unicorn saw of him. Oh, the last the unicorn saw of him were the tiny skitterings were a tiny skittering between the trees, and her eyes might have deceived her, for the night was full of wings now. At least he did recognize me, she thought sadly. That means something, but she answered herself. No, that means nothing at all. Except that somebody once made up a song about unicorns or a poem. But the Red Bull, what could he have meant by that? Another song, I suppose. She walked on slowly, and the night drew close around her. The sky was low and almost pure black, save for one spot of yellowing silver, where the moon placed behind the thick clouds. Oh, yeah. Where the moon paced behind the thick clouds. The unicorn sang softly to herself a song she had heard, a young girl singing in her forest long ago. Sparrow and cats will live in my shoe sooner than I will live with you. Fish will come walking out of the sea sooner than you will come back to me. She didn't understand the words, but the song made her think longingly of her home. It seemed to her that she had heard autumn beginning to shake the beech tree, and the very moment she had stepped out onto the road. At last she lay down in the cold grass and fell asleep. Unicorns are the wariest of all wild things, but they sleep soundly when they sleep. All the same, if she had not been dreaming of home, she would surely have roused to the sound of wheels and jingling coming close through the night, even though the wheels were muffled in rags and little bells wrapped in wool. But she was very far away, further away than the soft bells could go, and she did not wake. There were 9 wagons, each draped in black, each drawn by a lean black horse, and each bearing barred sides like teeth when the wind blew through the black hangings. The lead wagon was driven by a squat old woman, and it bore the sign on its shrouded sides that said in big letters, Mommy Fortuna's Midnight Carnival, and below, in smaller print, Creatures of Night Brought to Light. When the first wagon drew even with the pace, When the first wagon drew even with the pace where the unicorn lay asleep, the old woman suddenly pulled her black horse to a stop. All the other wagons stopped too and waited silently as the old woman swung herself to the ground with an ugly grace. Gliding close to the unicorn, she peered down at her for a long time and then said, Well, well, bless my old husk of a heart. And here I thought I'd seen the last of them. Her voice left a flavor of honey and gunpowder in the air. If he knew, she said, and she showed pebbly teeth as she smiled, but I don't think I'll tell him. She looked back at the black wagons and snapped her fingers twice. The drivers of the second and third wagons got down and came towards her. One was short and dark and stony, like herself. The other was a tall, thin man with an air of resolute bewilderment. He wore an old black cloak, and his eyes were green. What do you see? The old woman asked the short man. Ruck. What do you see lying there? Dead horse, he answered. No, not dead. Give it. No, not dead. Give it to the manicore or the dragon. His chuckle sounded like matches striking. You're a fool, Mommy Fortuna said to him. And then to the others, What about you, wizard, seer, thaumaturge? What do you see with your sorcerer's light? She joined with the man Ruck in a ratchety roar of laughter, but it ended when she saw that the tall man was still staring at the unicorn. Answer me, you juggler, she snarled, but the tall man did not turn his head. The old woman turned it for him, reaching out a crab-like hand to yank his chin around. His eyes fell before her yellow stare. A horse, he muttered. A white mare. Mommy Fortuna looked at him for a long time. You're a fool too, magician, she snickered at last, but a worse fool than Ruck, and a more dangerous one. He lies only out of greed, but you lie out of fear, or could it be kindness? The man said nothing, and Mommy Fortuna laughed by herself. All right, she said. It's a white mare. I want her for the carnival. The ninth cage is empty. I'll need a rope. I'll need a rope. A rope, Rook said. He was about to turn away, but the old one stopped him. The only rope that could hold her, he told him, would be the cord with which the old gods bound the Fenris wolf, and one that made that one was made of fish's breath, bird spittle, and woman's beard. The meowing of a cat, and the sinews of a beet, and one thing more I remember, mountain roots, having none of these elements, not dwarves, nor dwarves to weave them for us. We'll have to do the best we can with iron bars. I'll put a sleep on her thus, and Mommy Fortuna's hands knitted the night air. While she grumbled a few unpleasant words in her throat, there was a smell of lightning around the unicorn. When the old woman had finished her spell, Now cage her, she said to the two men. She'll sleep till sunrise, whatever racket you make. Unless you are accustomed to stupidity, you touch her with your hands. Take the ninth cage to pieces and build it around her. But beware, the hand that so much as brushes her mane turns instantly to a donkey's hoof. You deserve it. To a donkey's hoof it deserves to be. Again she gazed mockingly at the tall, thin man. Your little tricks would be even harder for you than they already are, wizard, she said, wheezing. Get to work. There's not much dark left. When she was well out of earshot, sliding back into the shadow of her wagon, as though she had just come out to mark the hour, the man named Rook spat and said curiously, Now I wonder what's worrying the old squid. What would it matter if I touched the beast? The magician answered him in a voice almost too soft to be heard. The touch of a human hand would wake her out of the deepest sleep. The devil himself could lay on her, and Mommy Fortuna's no devil. She'd like us to think so, the dark man sneered. Donkey hooves, gah! But he thrust his hand deep into his pockets. Why would the spell be broken? It's just an old white mare. But the magician was walking away towards the last of the black wagons. Hurry, he called over his shoulder. It will be day soon. It took them the rest of the night to pull down the ninth wagon. Cage, bars and floor and roof, and then to put it back together around the sleeping unicorn. Rook was tugging at the door to make sure that it was securely locked when the gray trees in the east boiled over and the unicorn opened her eyes. The two men slipped hurriedly away, but the tall magician looked back in time to see the unicorn rise to her feet and stare at the iron bars, her head low, swaying like the head of an old white horse. Chapter 2. The 9 black wagons of the midnight carnival seemed smaller by daylight, and not menacing at all, but flimsy and fragile as dead leaves. Their draperies were gone, and they were now adorned with sad black banners cut from blankets and stubby black ribbons that twitched in the breeze. They were arranged strangely in a scrubby field. A pentacle of cages enclosing a triangle, and Mommy Fortuna's wagon lumping in the center. The cages alone retained its black veil, concealing whatever it contained. Mommy Fortuna was nowhere to be seen. The man named Rook was leading a straggling crowd of country folk slowly from one cage to the next, commenting somberly on the beast within. This here's the manticore, man's head, lion's body, tail of a scorpion, captured at midnight, eating werewolves to sweeten its breath. Creatures of the night, brought to light. Here's the dragon, breathes fire now and then, usually at people who poke it. Little boy, at people who poke it, little boy. Its inside, its inside is an inferno, and its skin is so cold it burns. The dragon speaks 17 languages badly and is subject to gout. The satyr ladies keep back, a real troublemaker, captured under curious circumstances, revealed to gentlemen only, for a token fee. After the show, creatures of the night, standing by the unicorn's cage, which was one of the inner three, the tall magician watched the procession proceed around the pentacle. I shouldn't be here, he said to the unicorn. The old woman warned me to stay away from you. He chuckled pleasantly. She has mocked me from the day I joined her, but I have made her nervous all the time. The unicorn hardly heard him. She turned and turned in her prison, her body shrinking from the touch of the iron bars all around her. No creature of man's night loves cold iron, and while the unicorn could endure its presence, the murderous smell of it seemed to turn her bones to sand and her blood to rain. The bars of her cage must have had some sort of spell on them, for they never stopped whispering evilly to one another in clawing, pattering voices. The heavy lock giggled and whined like a mad monkey. Tell me what you see, said the magician, as Mommy Fortuna had said to him. Look at your fellow legends and tell me what you see. Ruck's iron voice came clanging through the wan afternoon. Gatekeeper of the underworld, three heads, and a healthy coat of vipers. As you can see, last seen above ground in the time of Hercules, who dragged him up under one arm, but we lured him to light again with promises of a better life. Cerberus, look at those six cheated red eyes. You may look into them again one day, this way to the Midgard serpent. This way. The unicorn stared through her bars at the animals in the cage. Her eyes were wide with disbelief. It's only a dog, she whispered. It's a hungry, unhappy dog with only one head and hardly any coat at all. The poor thing. How could they ever take it for a Cerberus? Are they blind? Look again, the magician said. And the satyr? The unicorn continued. The satyr is an ape of old age with a twisted foot. The dragon is a crocodile, much more likely to breathe fish than fire. And the great manicore is a lion, a perfectly good lion, but no more monstrous than the others. I don't understand. It's got the whole world in its coils, Rook was droning, and once more the magician said, look again. Then, as though her eyes were getting used to the darkness, the unicorn began to perceive a second figure in each cage. They loomed hugely over the captives of the midnight carnival, and yet they were joined to them. Okay. Stormy dreams. Okay, wait. Okay, there's a mosquito in here. Okay, sorry about that. I had to kill a mosquito. Stormy dreams sprung from a grain of truth. So there was a manicore, famine-eyed, slobber-mouthed, roaring, curving its deadly tail over his back until the poison spines lolled and nodded just above his ears. And there was a lion, too, tiny and absurd by comparison. Yet they were the same creature. The unicorn stamped in wonder. It was so in all the other cages. The shadow dragon opened his mouth and hissed harmless fire to make the gapers gasp and cringe, while hell's snake-furred watchdog howled triple dooms and devastation down on his betrayers, and the satyr limped leering to the bars and beckoned young girls to impossible delights right there in public. As for the crocodile, the ape, and the sad dog, they faded steadily before the marvelous phantoms until they were only shadows themselves. even to the unicorn's undeceived eyes. "This is a strange sorcery," she said softly. "There's more meaning than magic to this." The magician laughed with pleasure and great relief. Well said. Well said indeed. I know the old whore wouldn't dazzle you with her two-penny spells. His voice grew hard and secret. "She made her third mistake now," he said, "and that's at least two too many for a tired old trickster like herself. The time draws near." "The time draws near," Rook was telling the crowd, as though he overheard the magician. "Ragnarok on the day. When the gods fall, the serpent of the Midgar will spit a storm of venom at great Thor himself till he tumbles over like a poisoned fly. And so he waits for Judgment Day and dreams about the part he'll play. It may be so, I couldn't say. Creatures of night brought to light." The cage was filled with snakes. There was no head to it, and there was no tail, nothing but a wave of tarnished darkness, rolling from one end of the cage to the other, leaving no room for anything but its own thunderous breathing. Only the unicorn saw coiled in the corner a baleful boa, brooding perhaps over its own judgment on the midnight carnival, but it was tiny and dim as the ghost of a worm in the serpent's shadow. A wandering gawk stuck up his hand and demanded of Rook, If this big snake do be coiled around the world, as you say, how could you to be having a piece of it in your wagon? And if it can shatter the sea just by stretching of itself, what's to keep it from crawling off wearing your whole show like a necklace?" There were murmurs of agreement, and some of the murmurs began to back warily away. "I'm glad you asked that, friend," Rook said, with a scowl. "It just so happens that the Midgard serpent exists in like another space from ours, another dimension. Normally, therefore, he's invisible, but dragged into our world. As Thor hooked him once, he shows clear as lightning, which also visits us from somewhere else, where it might look quite different, and naturally he might turn nasty if he knew that a bit of his tummy slack was on view daily and Sunday on view daily and Sundays in Mommy Fortuna's Midnight Carnival. But he doesn't know. He's got other things to think about than what becomes of his belly button, and we take our chances, as do you all, on his continual tranquility." He rolled and stretched the last word out like dough, and his hearers laughed carefully. Spells of seeming, the unicorn said. "She cannot make things." "Not truly change them," added the magician. "Her shabby skill lies in disguise, and even that knack would be beyond her if it weren't for the eagerness of those gulls, those marks, who to believe whatever comes easiest. She can't turn cream into butter, but she can give a lion the semblance of a manticore to eyes that want to see a manticore. There. Eyes that would take a real manticore for a lion, a dragon for a lizard, and the Midgard serpent for an earthquake, and a unicorn for a white mare." The unicorn halted in her slow, desperate round of the cage, realizing for the first time that the magician understood her speech. She smiled, and she saw that his face was frighteningly young for a grown man. Untraveled by time, unvisited by grief of wisdom. "I know you," he said. The bars whispered wickedly between them. Rook was leading the crowd to the inner cages now. The unicorn asked the tall man, Who are you?" "I'm called Schmendrick, the magician," he answered. You won't have heard of me." The unicorn came very near to explaining that it was hardly for her to have heard of one wizard or another, but something sad and valiant in his voice kept her from it. The magician said, I entertain for sightseers as they gather for the show. Miniature magic, sleight of hand, flowers to flags, and flags to fish, all accompanied by persuasive patter and a suggestion that I could work more ominous wonders if I chose. It's not much of a job, but I've had worse, and I'll have better one day. This is not the end. But the sound of his voice made the unicorn feel as though she were trapped forever, and once more she began pacing the cage, moving to keep her heart from bursting with the terror of being closed in. Rook was standing before a cage that contained nothing but a small brown spider, weaving a modest web across the bars. Arachne of Lydia, he told the crowd, guaranteed this the greatest weaver of the world. Her fate's the proof of it. She had the bad luck of defeating the goddess Athena in a weaving contest. Athena was a sore loser, and Arachne is now a spider, creating only for Mama Fortuna's Midnight Carnival, by special arrangement, warp of snow and wolf of flame, and never any two the same. Arachne. Okay, let me plug this in because I am running out of power. There. Now, strung on the loom of the iron bars, the web was very simple and almost colorless, except for the occasional rainbow shiver when the spider scuttled out on it and put a thread right. But it drew the onlooker's eye and the unicorn's eye as well, back and forth and steadily deeper until they seemed to be looking down into great rifts in the world, black fissures that widened remorselessly and yet would not fall into pieces as long as Arachne's web held the world together. The unicorn shook herself free with a sigh and saw the real web again. It was very simple and almost colorless. It isn't like the others, she said. No, Schmindrick agreed grudgingly, but there's no credit due to Mommy Fortuna for that. You see, the spider believes she sees those cat's cradles herself and thinks them her own works. Belief makes all the difference to magic, like Mommy Fortuna's. Why, if that troop of witlings withdrew their wonder, there'd be nothing left of all her witchery but the sound of a spider weeping, and no one would hear it. The unicorn did not want to look into the web again. She glanced at the cage closest to her own, and suddenly felt the breath in her body turning to cold iron. There sat on an oaken perch a creature with the body of a great bronze bird and a hag's face, clenched and deadly as the talons with which she gripped the wood. She had the shaggy, round ears of a bear, but down her scaly shoulders, mingled with the bright knives of her plumage, there fell her hair, the color of moonlight, thick and youngful, around the hating human face. She glittered, but to look at her was to feel the light going out of the sky. Catching sight of the unicorn, she made a queer sound, like a hiss and a chuckling sound. The unicorn sat quietly. This one is real. This is the harpy Solano. Schminder's face had gone the color of oatmeal. The old woman caught her by chance, he whispered, asleep as she took you. But it was ill fortunate. Oh, excuse me. But it was ill fortune that they both knew it. Mommy Fortuna's craft is just sure enough to hold the monster, but its mere presence is wearing all of her spells so thin that in a little time she won't have the power enough left. With a real harpy, a real unicorn, the truth melts her magic. Always, but she cannot keep from trying to make it serve her. But this time, okay. We're going to stop this here. It is almost 30 minutes. We will pick up right here. and in the next episode. We've been reading from, we made it to page, what page is this? Page 27. That's good. We've been reading from The Last Unicorn by Peter S. Beagle, and we will be continuing this at a future date. If you like this content, make sure you like and subscribe and ring the bell so you know when I upload, and if you want to support me in any way at all that information will be in the description below. So, as always, thanks for watching, everyone, and have a great day.